Good morning, friends, and happy Halloween. I'm Xavier, and it's time for the Morning Roundup. I do this little newscast Monday through Friday, and I try to pull the stories that have more of a spotlight for the Black community, and I try to do it in about 10 minutes. Today is Monday, October 31st, 2022. Here's today's news just for you. First up from New York. Over the weekend, the Reverend Calvin O. Butts III, who fought poverty and racism as pastor of Harlem's historic Abyssinian Baptist Church, died Friday at age 73. This was announced by the church. No cause of death was given. Butts was known for working with political leaders across the ideological spectrum. In 1995, Republican Governor George Pataki appointed Butts to 2 state boards that controlled economic development grants to businesses. That same year, Butts hosted then Cuban leader Fidel Castro at Abyssinian, where the fatigues-wearing communists received a hero's welcome. Butts' impact extended far beyond his church's walls. In 1989, he established the nonprofit Abyssinian Development Corps to develop moderate-income housing, retail, schools, and other projects in the surrounding neighborhood. Butts helped mobilize church leaders to support programs for AIDS patients in the 1980s, and most recently set up a COVID-19 vaccination clinic at Abyssinian to encourage community residents to get immunized against the virus. Tributes to Butts poured in Friday. He was a dominant faith and academic leader for decades, the Reverend Al Sharpton said in a statement. We knew each other for more than 40 years, and while we did not always agree, we always came back together. New York Governor Kathy Hochul called Butts a force for moral clarity, a voice in his Harlem community, a counselor to so many of us in public service, and said she was proud to call him a friend. Next, also out of New York, Trump's company, the Trump Organization, is on trial for criminal tax fraud, on the hook for what prosecutors say was a 15-year scheme by top officials to avoid paying taxes on those fringe benefits. In opening statements, prosecutors and defense lawyers sparred over the company's culpability. Prosecutor Susan Hoffinger argued the company is liable because the officials were highly managerial agents entrusted to act on behalf of the company and its various entities, and that the company benefited because it didn't have to pay them as much in actual salary. A company lawyer, Susan Neschles, countered that the company was being unfairly blamed for the actions of an executive, longtime finance chief Alan Weisselberg, who had essentially gone rogue and was now cooperating with prosecutors to save himself. Weisselberg, a major beneficiary of the scheme whose apartment, cars, and grandchildren's school tuition were paid by the company. He pleaded guilty and has agreed to testify against the company. It's one of 3 active cases involving Trump or the Trump Organization in New York courts. Beyond the criminal case, Trump and the Trump Organization are defendants in a lawsuit brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, who alleges that Trump and the company inflated his net worth by billions of dollars and misled banks and others for years about the value of various assets. A hearing on that case is scheduled for Thursday. Next, out of Milwaukee. Milwaukee's top election officials surveyed about 20 poll workers gathered in a classroom in a city building stuffed with election supplies, then spoke frankly about the tense environment they may face next week when the city expects more people watching their work than ever before. That tension is higher in the handful of battleground states like Wisconsin, where Trump and others were quick to cry fraud after later writing results from Democratic-dominated Milwaukee helped Joe Biden narrowly carry the state in 2020. Recounts demanded by Trump confirmed election officials nationally are concerned about a flood of conspiracy theorists signing up to work as poll watchers, with some groups that have trafficked in lies about the 2020 election recruiting and training watchers, particularly in swing states like Wisconsin. Wisconsin requires poll workers to be trained only every 2 years, but this year, Milwaukee is offering much more frequent training than in elections past, including informational videos and 1-hour sessions focused on specific topics like voter registration. The content remains unchanged. From Brazil. Brazil's Lula to reclaim presidency after beating Bolsonaro, giving the leftist former president another shot at power in a rejection of incumbent Jair Bolsonaro's far-right politics. De Silva received 50.9% and Bolsonaro 49.1%. according to the election authority. The results came in today, and congratulations poured in from the world leaders. Bolsonaro still had yet to publicly concede or react in any way, even as truckers blockaded some roads across the country in protest. Bolsonaro's campaign had made repeated, unproven claims of possible electoral manipulation before the vote, raising fears that if he lost, he would not accept defeat and try to challenge the results. For De Silva, the high-stakes election was a stunning comeback. His imprisonment for corruption sidelined him from the 2018 election, won by Bolsonaro, who has used the presidency to promote conservative social values while also delivering incendiary speeches and testing democratic institutions. This was the country's tightest election since its return to democracy in 1985, and the first time that a sitting president failed to win re-election. Just over 2 million votes separated the two candidates. The previous closest race in 2014 was decided by a margin of roughly 3.5 million votes. Some of Bolsonaro's supporters outside his home in Rio on Sunday night screamed about electoral fraud, and overnight truck drivers who backed Bolsonaro blocked several roads across the country, including a stretch of the Rio de Janeiro-Sao Paulo highway. This is according to local media. Videos posted on social media early this morning showed traffic at a complete halt. Similar reports popped up in several other states. De Silva's win extended a wave of recent leftist triumphs across the region, including Chile, Colombia, and Argentina. From South Korea, a man-made disaster. Seoul police assigned 137 officers to manage a crowd of Halloween partiers, anticipated to number over 100,000 over the weekend, a decision that has come under intense criticism following the deaths of more than 150 people when the group surged. By comparison, nearly 7,000 police officers were sent to another part of the South Korean capital on Saturday to monitor dueling protests that drew tens of thousands, but still fewer people than flocked to the popular nightlife district of Icheon the same night. Even the task force created to investigate why the crowd surged, with 475 members, is more 3 times larger than the detail assigned to crowd control. Saturday's deaths occurred in a downhill alley running between a dense row of storefronts and the landmark Hotel Hamilton Hotel. The path became clogged by a huge throng of partygoers before some of them fell over and toppled like dominoes, according to witnesses. Emergency workers were so overwhelmed by the number of people lying motionless on the ground that they asked pedestrians to help them with CPR. But Choi Suk-jae, an emergency medicine specialist and chief spokesperson of the Korean Emergency Medical Association, said CPR, which ideally should be administered within a handful of minutes, wouldn't have made much of a difference in many cases, since the paramedics were delayed getting to the scene because the area was so packed. In the 2 previous years, the district's preparations for the Halloween festivities were focused on preventing the spread of COVID-19 among partygoers. Workers toured bars, restaurants, and nightclubs to monitor whether they were abiding by social distancing rules, and checkpoints were established in crowded areas where public workers and volunteers took the temperatures of partygoers. Saturday's crush was the country's biggest disaster since 304 people, mostly high school students, died in a ferry sinking in April 2014. The sinking exposed lax safety rules and regulatory failures. Finally, from Morning India, 9 arrested after a bridge collapses in India, killing 134. Police in Western India arrested 9 people on Monday as they investigated the collapse of a newly repaired 143 suspension bridge in one of the country's worst accidents in years. The collapse Sunday evening in Gujarat state plunged hundreds of people into a river, killing at least 134. As families mourned the dead, attention turned to why the pedestrian bridge, built during British colonialism in the late 1800s and touted by the state's tourism website as an artistic and technological marvel, collapsed, and who might be responsible. The bridge had just reopened 4 days earlier. Inspector General Ashok Yadav said police have formed a special investigation team, and those arrested include managers of the bridge operator, Oriva Group, and its staff. We won't let the guilty get away. We won't spare anyone. Gujarat authorities opened a case against Oriva for suspected culpable homicide, attempted culpable homicide, and other violations. Authorities said the structure collapsed under the weight of hundreds of people. A security video of the disaster showed it shaking violently and people trying to hold on to its cables and metal fencing. before the aluminum walkway gave way and crashed into the river. The bridge split in the middle with its walkway hanging down, its cables snapped. Police said at least 134 people were confirmed dead and many others were admitted to hospitals in critical condition. Emergency responders and rescuers worked overnight and throughout Monday to search for survivors. State Minister Harish Yangev said most of the victims were teenagers, women, and older people. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Keep up with me on Instagram at The Morning Roundup. I also have another show called The Black Case Files where I do more of a deep dive on murders, mysteries, conspiracies, and history, focusing on people of color. That show is always linked below. Make sure you are registered to vote, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, friends.